Hey, my name is David Perell, and I want to show you how I wrote the essay, News in the Age of Abundance. As I wrote this, I ended up tracking and storing and saving basically the entire process of writing a long form essay, and today I want to share that with you. So you'll see the essay is fairly long. I'll get it up for you here. And it's called News in the Age of Abundance, and it's about 16,000 words, so probably about one third or a quarter length of your average book. And you'll see there's quotes, graphs that I drew, graphs that I saved, statistics. There's so much information in here, and I want to show you how I actually keep track of all that. So what you'll see here is what's on the screen right now. This is the secret. This is the thing that makes it all possible. And this is my note-taking system. So what I do is I save everything in Evernote, and I had a folder called News Essay. And I have been collecting ideas for this essay for the better part of the last 3 or 4 years, and actually saving them in here for almost 3 years. So what I do is I will just create some kind of, for example, I read a book called The News by Alain de Botton, and I saved all of my highlights here, and here's something from newspaper layoffs, and I just save them as, I save these graphs and these charts as I come across them, and then later on, I can come back to it, and this stuff is just always saved in my pocket so that when I actually begin to write an essay, I don't usually have to go back and find things that other people would. In the online course that I teach, it's a writing course called Rite of Passage. This is one of the very first things that we talk about. There's two categorizations that matter. The first is notebooks, and well, it's all under notebooks. The first is what I would call projects or hot notebooks, things that I'm working on right now. And then I just have these things called resources over on the left side of the screen here. You can see, for example, saving stuff on bootstrapping and business models and cities and urbanisms, Christianity, complexity, community, just all these different ideas. So in Rite of Passage, I make sure that every student has what's called hot notebooks. So those are things that you're working on, and cold notebooks. And I believe that so many people are trying to improve their writing by reading writing books and trying to learn from fiction writers. If you want to write fiction or nonfiction, the very best thing that you can do is start by building a note-taking system like this. It makes everything else so much easier. So let's get back to the actual essay, which is made possible because of this system. So what I want to do is I want to start here with one of my very first outlines. So I was guided by a very central question, like what happened to the news? Because the news has gone crazy, and there's nothing that has changed more in the past decade than our information environment. And a lot of us are confused, and we don't really understand what's happening. And I wanted to show what happened to the actual structure of media and information to make the news seem so crazy. And so what I thought of from the very beginning was, hey, I'll actually go back to a day in like the 1600s when there was no news, and I would tell the story, and then I would sort of go through the history of the news, talk about how the news was centralized, how we're losing some of the shared narratives that once held us together. And then I would talk about what changed, problems with the news. You'll see the illusion of knowledge that ends up making it the entire way through. Then things like drowning in a sea of information, I sort of ended up deconstructing that. And then this idea from being well-read to well-informed, that is an idea that shines through the entire essay. And you'll see the actual cadence at which I begin to save notes really begins to increase in October. Some of the notes are very matter of fact, like, what is the fairness doctrine? Okay, let's go read a Wikipedia page about this. Or like the one I showed you earlier about newspaper layoffs. And then some of them are a bit more theoretical. So this is from Walter Lippmann, who was an early media analyst critic in the early 20th century. Then some ideas about the scapegoat mechanism. This comes from an anthropologist named René Girard. So you'll see I'm pulling from some ideas that are very matter of fact and then some that are a bit more heady and just trying to sort of combine it all. One thing that's really important here is this is purposefully messy. I want it to be well organized enough that I can actually find the things that I'm looking for, but I want it to be messy enough that things begin to cross-pollinate, and the messiness and the chaos of this actually creates some serendipity so that it isn't just me thinking, it is me thinking with the computer. It is my first brain here, my biological brain, and my computer brain, and the two of us working together. That is what makes these essays possible, and that's why I can end up getting so many new ideas once I start writing, because it's actually teamwork between me and my computer. So, very practically, if you don't have this kind of note-taking system, well, either take rite of passage, and I will show you in my writing course how to do this, or have a Google Doc that you just dump everything into. Let me show you. So, I actually did this, where I had one actual sheet that I guess I called an outline, but I guess I'll call it idea reservoir. That is definitely not how you spell reservoir. Whatever. So that is idea reservoir. And you'll see I just saved different ideas in here. And so you could think of this as like the first funnel of ideas of I'm just going to put it into my system and then have it be searchable. This on the right was just different ideas that I'd collected. So for example, we were having a conversation in my kitchen table with my mom and my dad's business partner, and we were talking about Confucius. So I pulled this up, found the quote on Goodreads, boom, save it. But then there's other things like, this was fairly interesting, how familiarity actually breeds content, that the more people know each other, that actually creates certain kinds of content and make people not actually like each other sometimes. And so I saved this, and this general concept actually ended up making it into the essay. And then this chart on political polarization came from a dinner I had in San Francisco. Asked the person sitting next to me, hey, can you send me that? Boom, right there. So everything in here is just different ideas that I collected. If you were to actually look through it. For example, this, you're going to like this. This tweet, like from Tyler Cowen, am I wrong to think that the Peloton ad ended up being a bigger story than the Afghanistan war documents? You'll see in my actual essay, this is what ends up happening. Where I say, often the bloodiest online battles are waged over the pettiest conflicts, such as the bitter controversy over the sexist and dystopian politics of a recent Peloton commercial, which caused the stock to fall by 10%. Ferocious debates over the politics of the television commercial pulled attention away from a more important story about the leaked Afghanistan war documents, which showed that the U.S. government deliberately misled the American public about its 18-year involvement in Afghanistan, the longest armed conflict in U.S. history. So what you can see there is I'm actually deconstructing what Tyler said. And you can see this tweet got a lot of retweets and likes, so I knew that it was actually framed well, and I knew that the idea resonated with people. So what I did was I took something that was one sentence and I turned it into a paragraph, right? Whereas one of the things that I also did was this story of horse handicappers and betting. And you'll see here, for example, I had this very long paragraph about this guy named Paul Slovic, and I think I ended up making it even longer. Yeah, look at this. So all of this was this section on Paul Slovic, and as I began to read the essay and look at it, I was like, whoa, that's way too long. So if the Afghanistan war document tweet was about starting small and expanding it to add some context, you'll see here what I did was exactly the opposite, where sometimes what you need to do is, look at this, I just turn this into one paragraph. So I think of writing just inherently when you're working from ideas that already exist, you're either trying to expand and add context to existing ideas, or you are trying to make big ideas small and basically add more energy and information density to them. So anyway, back to the outline. So I had that first outline, and then you'll see I worked through a series of different outlines. So I had this first one, bare bones, then I reconstructed it into, this is very traditionally what you think of an outline. And so this was in November. So this was 3 months before I actually published the essay, and a lot of stuff didn't make it. Kayfabe, charisma, Hayes Code, fairness doctrine, didn't write about JFK, didn't write about preference falsification, but was just holding these ideas in my head and making them make the cut in order to get into the essay. Whereas other things like loss of geographic monopolies and what happens when a city loses its newspaper, those are big parts of the essay. But you'll see I'm constantly changing and tweaking the essay. Sometimes I actually draw out the outline just to get a different lens on how I'm going to organize this thing. And by changing it and tweaking it, look, it's really frustrating. But I think that now, having written many of these, time spent on organization doesn't feel productive in the moment, but ends up being really productive in retrospect, because it orients you to make sure that you're actually working on the most productive things. And also, organization is proof, having to reorganize something is proof that you're learning something. Because if you hadn't seen this way of structuring your ideas before, but you're seeing it now, it means that you've walked further down the path of understanding this subject, and maybe you even learned something that you didn't know before. So what I did was I took this, kind of had it on the right side of my screen, and then you'll see I had like why newspapers collapsed. So back to the original outline, I had why newspapers are collapsing, turned it into this, why newspapers collapsed. And what I would do is I would just write different ideas. So when a city loses its newspaper, newspapers lost their geographic monopoly. And I would just write these little snippets, sort of things that were top of mind. And I would basically just work through section by section, doing whatever I felt like doing on any given day. Sort of no rhyme or reason to anything, just trying to get stuff out there. And there's so much stuff in here, like this whole research project on this Bloomberg $400 emergency thing. I spent a whole day just looking at that, didn't make the cut. I want everything in my long form essays to be worth your time, and that's why it has to go through like this mill of compression over and over again, so that the essay, even though it's very long, it has been compressed and distilled and edited so that the good can leave, so that the great can stay. So I go through this, and at some point it feels long enough where I need to change. And you'll see even here, I wasn't entirely done. But this Greshams Law concept, which I'm going to talk about later, because I think does a really good job of showing how an idea actually evolves, very specific one. I'm going to show you that last. But you'll see that's all throughout the piece. So then what I do is I get really frustrated because this begins to feel like too much, where you need a way to actually organize and wrap your head around an essay like this, because otherwise it's just too big. There's so much stuff going on, and your brain, if you're trying to spend mental energy trying to keep up with the organization of this piece, you can't actually dive into the specifics. And what I try to do is outsource everything above the level of the paragraph to the page. So get that out of my head. So in terms of what paragraph is going to follow what paragraph, how sections are going to be structured, how the end is actually going to ladder back to the beginning, these themes that continue throughout the piece, all of that I want to be in an outline so that then when I'm writing, I can only focus on this one idea of, for example, television didn't just decrease demand for the news, it introduced all kinds of news together. New kinds of news altogether. That's really interesting, but in order to unpack that, that requires my full and undivided attention, which means I cannot be thinking about organization. So what I did was I got frustrated and I created this new outline on top of it. And I'm telling you, the note-taking system makes it so much easier. Where what I did was I had these different sections, and then so that I could actually force myself to focus on one thing and not be overwhelmed by all the different just words and ideas on one page, what I did was I created specific pages for specific ideas. So what I could do is I could go to the outline, I could say, today I'm going to write about common knowledge and the benefits of advertising, and then whoop, I would be sent right into that note. And then in a single day, what I would just try to do is write a single section as if I was writing an ordinary blog post. And I would just focus on this, trying to make this good and coherent. And then I could always come back to that original outline. So I think that that is something that's very important. When I write, I try to make the actual packet of what I'm going to ship that day the same length, no matter what. So generally I can do 750 to 1,000 words in a single setting. So I just work in 1,000-word chunks, and I just divide the piece up in 1,000-word chunks, and then I deal with things later when it comes to actually rearranging things. So you can see for geographic monopolies, once again, that same sort of thing, and I bet this is 660 words. Let's see, it is 469, even less. So I would just write this, and I would be content with my work for the day, and I would go back. So now that I had all of these different concepts and outlines, what I did was I began to turn it into an actual draft. And I basically took, what I do is I keep this LD thing here, and I took all those sections that had been parsed out one by one, and I had brought it all back into this single outline, and then I just went through section by section and cutting. And what I do is I write little notes to myself. So I'll write, need an introduction here, need a transition here. I have these little codes that I use. Let me show you this. This is really helpful. This will end up saving you a lot of time if this is the kind of thing that works for you. So what you'll see here is I have these little colors that I use for each sort of specific thing that comes up. So blue for double checking facts, red for adding sources, purple for rewriting sentences, green, talk more about this, orange, more research required, pink for footnotes, and brown for adding a section. So why do I do this? Well, let me show you. So I do this because when I'm writing, One thing that is really important is to stay in the flow. It is so easy to get distracted when you're writing and then basically get on these tangents. You see people do this all the time where they'll be writing and all of a sudden they'll start researching something. I mean, you probably do this, right? You start researching something, you get down a rabbit hole, and you don't actually end up writing. When I write, I write. I do not do any research. I don't do anything except for write. I put words on the page, and it allows me to be so much more prolific, but I am only able to do that because of the color coding. For example, once again, this orange right here, we go back, we know that that means that there's more research required. Or you come back to the long essay and you see purple, okay? So blue, for example, check the facts, make sure that that looks good. Purple, I'm going to have to rewrite this sentence. And then I can just come back to it when I'm in an editing state, which is a different state of mind from actually producing things. So then what I did was I asked some friends to help me in Google Docs. So I had finally had the essay at a length that I thought was pretty good. And I was just sort of listening to myself saying, okay, you know what? I'm kind of tired of this essay, but I don't really see it anymore. Sometimes you just get so close to a body of work that you can no longer look at it in a way that's objective, and it's just always kind of overwhelming. So what I did was I asked some friends to look at it. So I had gone through, had added some things in Google Doc, and then my friends would look through it, and adding it in Google Docs, once again, forced me to add just another level of rigor. And you'll see, like, my friend Will comes in and he talks about how I should change the framing of the sentences, how I should rearrange the paragraphs here. I write little notes to myself. Like, one of the things that a lot of people complained about as they were reading this essay was that chronologically, the essay hopped between time slots. So I'd go like 1950, 1760, 2004, 1840, and I wanted to not do that. So I put a note to myself here, and you'll see it's 56 pages, and there was Will and a bunch of other editors who went through it. And so I've now gone through most of the notes, but you'll see, like, he didn't agree with something. And so then I just went through them all, and I made the edits as need be. And once I was done with the Google Doc, I was basically ready to publish. And what I did was, you'll see I have these drawings in my essay. These ones right here. And what I'll do, I just think that they make the essay a lot more personal. And I always use the same color template of a light gray, a light blue, a dark blue, and a dark gray. I just have that as a save template for the colors that I use. And I use an app called Concepts. And I've always really liked it. It is designed for high-end architects, but you can see you can just do amazing things in it. It's quite a steep learning curve. I will warn you, probably took me 15 hours of really learning it to get to a place where I'm decent at it. But it is really helpful and allows me to create drawings that look really beautiful. So it's about a $30 iPad app. Definitely recommend it if that's something that you want to do. So I want to show you, finally, now that you've seen how I go from outline to outline, kind of restructuring and rearranging, I just want to go through Greshams Law and show you what it looks look like to have an idea evolve. So the idea came from a tweet that I saw where somebody said something to the effect of low quality information drives out high quality information. And I said that is such an interesting idea. I'm going to go pursue that. And I had watched a video a couple weeks ago about Greshams Law, basically applying this to the world of finance, where low quality coins are spent before high quality ones. And so you end up in these markets, kind of like a market for lemons, where you only have the low quality coins because people keep the high quality ones. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to go investigate this. I just had this interestingness antenna that was activating. So we'll go back to this and you'll see that I had it just as an idea here. I kind of always knew that it was going to be a pillar of what I wanted to write about. Then we'll go into my first draft and you'll see I have a Greshams Law sentence or paragraph where I talk about exactly that. The incentives of news publishing remind me of a concept from finance called Greshams Law, a monetary principle which states that bad money drives out good money until only bad money is left. So I think that it's fairly indicative, this section of where interesting ideas come from. What I did here was I took a FAR analogy from finance and I applied it to the news. And then I sort of had that ruminating in my brain, but then I saw this tweet and I said, ha, that's interesting. I'm going to focus on that and write about it. And then because I had the tweet, which was the seed of the idea, and I had the built-in context, I could combine that for this point about Greshams Law. So then I take this and I have this section about Greshams Law, which is probably 5 paragraphs. Then I turn it into a second draft and I'm always just sort of working through it. And I begin to summarize it here, just really focus on online information is erased to the bottom when I scroll Twitter moments or Snapchat's Discover section. Once again, it reminds me of the idea that bad money drives out good money until only bad money is left because Twitter moments and Snapchat Discover are total junk. Then I come back into the latest version of my essay and you'll see I actually begin to write about, remember I have the purple here for needs more explaining, and you'll see now I have some of the language that I begin to use in the final essay. I talk about Greshams Law, then the Explore tab of Twitter. I have this don't blame the journalists, blame the incentives of the system sentence, which ends up making it into the final essay. And I'm just sort of working through it. One of the things that I teach a lot in Rite of Passage, what I teach my writing students to do, is to work out ideas in conversation. And this was one of those things that I wasn't really sure how much cultural familiarity there was with Greshams Law. And what I discovered from conversations of just explaining this idea to friends at dinner, to different people that I met for coffee, was that the idea wasn't that complicated, but people didn't know what Greshams Law was. So I knew that I would have to explain Greshams Law very simply, and I couldn't just rely on Greshams Law to anchor the idea. I'd have to basically give a summary of it, but, and this is very important, I knew that the summary didn't need to be really long because people had this embedded understanding of what Greshams Law is. And that's really important because had I overestimated how much people knew, this idea, which is foundational to the essay, wouldn't have caught on. And had I underestimated it, then we would have had the other issue where I would have just written way too much and that would have created a rambling essay. So then you'll see in the final news organization, this is what I end up using. I have Greshams Law here, and you'll see it's actually under this idea called the paradox of abundance. So this, my friend, is where things get interesting. So I'm working through this idea over and over and over, and I end up going from Gresham's Law actually takes me to this new idea called the paradox of abundance, and maybe is sort of the thesis I have now that I'm going to really begin to explore, that all abundant markets work the same way, where you'll see here, and I talk about this more in the essay, so I'm not going to explain it right now, where the median shifts left, but then the good actually gets better. So you have this weird kind of inequality that is a result of the incentives and the structure of these abundant systems. And I relate it to both food and information. And I only got there because I had studied Gresham's Law. So actually beginning to work through this and explaining it to people, I ended up explaining Gresham's Law by using the terminology that I ended up coming up with for the paradox of abundance. And then I said, hey, I'm just going to name this term, and now I have a new idea, a new model that I can use to see the world that is uniquely mine. That is super cool. And you'll see I end up having one paragraph from Gresham's Law. So that is what it takes to come up with an idea like this, and that is all the steps for really just one paragraph. You'll see that there's a little bit down here about the Explore tab on Twitter and this Outbrain thing that you see at the bottom of all these websites. But really, all of Gresham's Law is summarized in this one paragraph. And so those are all the steps that I actually go through. And best of all, this is what I end up with, an idea that, for me, this was one of the coolest. I actually thought about naming the essay The Paradox of Abundance, but it was a little too just complicated, and I just was worried that it wasn't going to stick as well as News in the Age of Abundance. But this really is what the essay is built around, and it just came through going through that. So I want to just end by showing you how many hours this took and how I would categorize that. So I save everything in a app called Timular, and this essay took me 67 hours and 38 minutes, of which this probably should have just been categorized as, oh no, maybe not. This was probably uploading stuff. So 66 hours, so 67 hours of actual writing. And you'll see it really begins to pick up in October, November, December, January. Worked on this tons. And then a bit in February. I spent 28 hours on my first draft, 19 hours editing, 14 hours organizing, 2 hours and 37 minutes doing those drawings, and then 15 minutes outlining. But outlining and organization are fairly similar. So as you can see, I spent 15 hours, almost 15 hours, organizing this piece. That right there is the delta between writing a blog post and writing a long form essay. That is the thing, that as you get longer in your writing, you have to spend a disproportionate amount of time organizing your work, and it's almost impossible to get around that. So as you can see here, these are all of the different time entries that I had, and that 67 hours doesn't include the time that people spent editing my essay. It doesn't include the time that I spent reading about the essay. It doesn't include the time that I spent thinking about the essay. That is 67 hours of fingers on keyboard working on the essay. And that's what it takes. So I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that you enjoyed the essay. And thank you so much for watching. If this is something that you want to learn how to do, I teach an online writing course called Rite of Passage. And here is the site. Basically, it is a 5-week intense program where we learn how to write short form essays. We don't do any of this, but what it is you come in, you begin to build up your note-taking system. You're with a group of hundreds of different hyper-curious, passionate about ideas people just like yourself. And in 5 weeks, you learn how to write online and how to become a citizen of the internet. What does it mean to live and operate, work, make friends, meet people in this age of the internet? Writing is the language of the internet. We're reading and writing more than ever, and it is a gateway to all kinds of serendipity. So I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that you'll join us for Rite of Passage, and thanks so much for watching.